Well, we welcome you today as we continue this week, sixth week in Ordinary Time. And we continue with our story of Genesis, right? And what a powerful opportunity this is in this reading, hearing again this origin story, this theological origin story for humanity. And if you look at this, in many ways, this text recapitulates is a better word. It sort of redoes the events of the fall themselves. And I talked about the idea of the fall from grace is like causing this ripple effect, right? Where it kind of radiates outward from that breakdown in the relationship between humanity with God as Father, as provider, as a natural relationship of grace, and going into a kind of a broken situation where there's an adversarial relationship with God, and that continues to our day, right? We continue to have to struggle to find our way to God. And so in the story, of course, we've heard this, basically most of us have heard this story all of our lives in one form or the other. So Cain and Abel are both sacrificing to God. And one of the things here is that, Cain just brings something. We know that the Israelites would get into these patterns of offering, when they had required sacrifices much later on, they would offer at times a lame animal or an animal that was going to die anyway, or like the worst yield they had, and keep the best yield for themselves. And here, this is kind of what Cain does, right? He offers something like that, and Abel brings the very best that he has, whether it's produce or the healthiest animal he has for a sacrifice. And one of the things you might wonder is, why does Cain care that God doesn't accept it? Cain is crestfallen. Like, why does it matter if he doesn't really care what he offers to God? Why does it matter to him that why is God displeased? Well, because in this place, this is really anthropomorphized. Notice that God is having these conversations with Cain. God is talking to him. God is sharing with him a lot. And so in this time, the perception was that if you were blessed, you had great abundance. You had a great amount of things in this life. And if you were in a bad relationship with God, then you would suffer, you would go without. And so the implication here is that not only does God not accept Cain's inferior sacrifice, which is not an authentic one, but that Cain is not doing as well as a result of this. And so there's this very, again, kind of an ancient way of showing this relationship. And of course, there is the line that we've heard many times, where is your brother Abel? And then Cain says, am I my brother's keeper? And, we are, of course, responsible for each other. We're responsible for each other, especially for those who are, as St. Paul says, within the household of faith. And so we do bear responsibility. Each of us are brothers and sisters to each other. And we are, big brothers, big sisters, whatever, that we're supposed to support those who need our help and support. And, we are called to offer our best to God. And we're coming up to the season of Lent. And Lent is going to be a time that we go on sort of like a retreat as an entire church. That's kind of a good way of describing Lent that I heard a priest mention or say one time. He said, Lent is like a retreat for the whole church. And one of the things we have to ask ourselves is, do we offer our best to God, or do we settle for something that is less challenging? And we are called to offer that, because it is in giving that we receive so much back. And and then today in our gospel, we continue to read from Mark, and the Pharisees challenge him, challenge Jesus, and then he sighs and says, "You're not getting a sign," drops the mic and walks out. He basically just gets in the boat and leaves. And this is Mark and Jesus, right? Mark's Jesus is very brief. It's all about action. In Mark's gospel, Christ doesn't waste any time. He's constantly on the move, and that's just how he's depicted. And what we see in maybe other versions of this story is that he says this generation will not receive any other sign than the sign of Jonah, right? The sign and what was the sign of Jonah, which was basically that if you do not change, then you'll be destroyed, right? We have to change our ways. And the reason why the Pharisees and the scribes are asking for a sign is because they want to put Jesus in a box. He had already been healing people, he had been exorcising, he had been changing lives. But what they want to do is kind of say, okay, you're kind of a miracle worker, you're kind of weird, your teachings are weird, and you need to be responsible to us, that we're the authority. And Jesus is saying that you've made him, you've screwed up, essentially, that you Pharisees and scribes have not held up your role in maintaining the covenant of Moses. That the covenants pointed to me, that I am the fulfillment of these things, and so he sighs out of that sadness, right? So, as we continue this week, my thought with this, my prayer is that we always try to discern the signs in our own lives. How is God calling each of us to ongoing conversion? And do we offer something that is inferior, or do we really offer God our whole lives? Do we really ask that God will continue to become more the Lord and Master in our lives, and that we would try to move aside obstacles to the reign of God, the reign of Jesus Christ in each of our lives and in what we're doing?